The worst fantasy dialogue I ever wrote had a wise old wizard saying something like, "Behold, young apprentice, the ancient magics of our forebears beckon." This wasn't just terrible because of the flowery language, it fundamentally failed to do the one thing all great fantasy must do: make readers believe in the impossible. So in this video, I'm going to show you 6 crucial steps how I now transform my dialogue from cringeworthy medieval fairy speak into conversations that feel as natural as breathing, even with dragons and magic in the mix. Step 1 is all about the foundation. Think about how people in specialized professions talk about their work. A chef doesn't say, "Behold this magnificent culinary creation." They talk about flavor profiles and techniques with casual expertise. A doctor doesn't announce, "I shall now heal your grievous wounds," neither. They discuss symptoms and treatments matter-of-factly. For the purpose of this video, imagine a merchant named Mira who can see the history of any object she touches. When writing dialogue for her, a beginner might have a say, "Behold this ancient artifact of tremendous power." But that's not how someone who sees histories all day would talk. A voice more authentic to Mira's experience could sound like this instead. "Sure, it killed 3 kings, but have you seen the craftsmanship on these engravings? This will fetch double in the right market." This version works because it shows how a profession shapes her perspective. The magical ability is just a tool of her trade. Her merchant's eye for value comes through naturally. Let me break down how I create this kind of authentic voice. First, I look at professional background. What specialized knowledge would they take for granted? What aspects of their work excite them versus bore them? And what shortcuts or jargon would they use? Then I consider life experience. What's their education level? Which social class shaped their speech patterns? And what regional influences affect their dialogue? And finally, I ask myself what their personal quirks are. Do they have favorite expressions? What topics make them more formal or casual? And how do emotions affect their speech? Let me show you this in action with 3 different characters discussing the same enchanted sword. The scholar? The rune suggests early 3rd dynasty craftsmanship. See how the binding sigils intersect? Classic Viridian technique. The soldier? Balance is off. Light's too light for serious fighting. Fancy magic is useless if you can't hold your guard. And the street thief? Yeah, it glows pretty. Know what else glows? Guards' torches when they are looking for stolen magic. Hard pass. Each character reveals their background, priorities, and personality through how they discuss the same object. This is what makes dialogue feel authentic rather than forced. But having a unique voice for your character is just the first step. Because here's what too many fantasy writers miss. It's not just about what your characters say, it's about all the things they are not saying. Think of dialogue like an iceberg. What characters say out loud is just the 10% visible above water. The real story lies in the 90% beneath the surface. This hidden layer is what makes fantasy dialogue feel real and compelling. Let me show you how this works with our merchant Mira. When she handles a suspicious customer, watch how much story gets told without ever being stated directly. "This ring, my grandmother had one just like it. Funny coincidence. Tea? She lost it last month." Things have a way of circulating. "Sugar?" On the surface, this seems like a simple exchange about a ring and an offer of tea. But look at what's really happening. The customer is making a veiled accusation about stolen goods. Mira responds by neither confirming nor denying anything, while using the social ritual of serving tea to maintain control of the situation. Neither character directly states their intentions, yet the tension is clear. This kind of layered meaning transforms simple conversations into powerful scenes. Consider how much more interesting this is than if they'd had a direct confrontation. A bad version could sound like this: "I think this ring is stolen. I am offended by your accusation." The direct version feels flat because it lacks the complex dance of power, suspicion, and social masks that makes real conversations fascinating. Here's how you can build these layers into your own dialogue. Start with the surface conversation. What's literally being said? Then add your character's true intentions, their emotional state, and the power dynamics at play. Finally, consider how their social context affects what they can and can't say directly. Watch how this works in another scene with Mira handling a noble customer. "Or this thing?" She carefully places a priceless artifact on velvet cloth. "Had it for ages." The finger positions it precisely under the best light. Hardly worth mentioning, really. She tilts it subtly, letting enchanted runes catch the morning sun. Every action contradicts her casual words, creating delicious tension through contrast. Her dialogue says, "This isn't special," while her careful handling shouts, "This is extraordinarily valuable." This gap between words and actions reveals both her expertise and her understandings of how nobles prefer to shop. They want to feel like they're discovering treasures, not being sold them. The key to making subtext work is trusting your readers to pick up on these cues. You don't need to explain the hidden meanings. In fact, your dialogue becomes more powerful when you don't. Just like in real life, the most important things are often those left unsaid. Now, you might be thinking, great, my characters have unique voices and layered meanings, but how do I make their conversations actually flow? To solve this, think about how real people talk. We interrupt each other, we change topics mid-sentence, we answer questions with questions. Yet often in fantasy writing, especially by beginners, characters often deliver perfect monologues without a single or unfinished thought. There is a different way though. Let me show you how this works in practice. Here's Mira dealing with a young mage browsing her shop. Welcome, young practitioner of the mystic arts. I perceive you seek items of power. Allow me to demonstrate my most wondrous wares. This feels a bit clunky and on the nose. In a better version, she might instead say something like, "Careful with that one." Mira lunges forward as a crystal starts to spark. "Sorry, but those tend to react badly to untrained magic. Here, try, yes, this shelf instead. Everything here is starter friendly. Learned that lesson after the last accident." Can you see the difference? The first version is stiff and formal, classic fantasy speak. The second sounds like a real shopkeeper who's dealt with too many overeager apprentices breaking things. Real conversations have rhythm, they breathe. Watch how this works in a longer exchange. "I need something for protection," the young mage says, fidgeting with his sleeve. "Against?" Mira keeps polishing her crystal, but her eyes narrow slightly. "Just general protection." She sets down her cloth. "See, general protection could mean anything from keeping rats out of your pantry to, it's not rats." "Right," she studies him for a moment. "Those bruises on your wrist, they're from spell backlash, aren't they?" His shoulders tense. "I don't know what you..." "Save it. I've seen enough apprentices practicing forbidden spells to know the signs. So let's start over. Tell me what you're really working with, and I'll show you how to not blow yourself up." Notice the interruptions, the unfinished sentences, the way business and conversation weave together naturally? The scene flows because it follows the natural patterns of human speech. People rarely finish each other's thoughts perfectly. They stumble, restart, change direction mid-sentence. Don't be afraid to use em-dashes for interruptions or ellipses for trailing thoughts. Just don't overuse them. Like any technique, moderation is key. And when it comes to dialogue scenes overall, don't forget about movement. Dialogue isn't just about the actual words spoken, because people don't just stand still and talk. They fidget, handle objects, perform tasks while speaking. These actions can reinforce or contradict their words, adding layers of meaning to the conversation. Most importantly though, I always try to ensure that characters react to each other. Every line of dialogue should emerge naturally from what was just said or done. If you can swap the order of lines without changing the meaning, your dialogue isn't flowing naturally. But having said that, step 4 is where fantasy dialogue turns into something special. When it reveals your world without sounding like a history lesson. I use what I call the hint method. History woven naturally, information through conflict, natural terminology, and tells that reveal cultural background. Let me show you how Mira does it. Listen, ever since the moon markets closed, these protection charms are rare. I'm doing you a favor at this price. She runs her fingers along the charm's edge, then frowns. Interesting. The marker's mark is genuine, but this charm remembers being created last week. Not 50 years ago like that signature claims. In just a few lines we learn there were once magical markets associated with the moon, protection charms are valuable, there's a problem with counterfeit magical items can be dated and verified, and Mira's ability has practical business applications. Yet none of this feels like an information dump, because it all emerges naturally from the haggling context. This works because people don't explain their world, they live in it. A modern person doesn't say, "Let me tell you about smartphones which revolutionized communication in the early 21st century." They just use their phone and complain about battery life or bad reception. The same principle applies to how I approach fantasy dialogue. I let characters use magic, refer to historical events, and navigate their cultural social rules as naturally as we check our emails. The key is making these elements relevant to the immediate conversation. And if these tips and steps resonate, then you'll love the Tale Tinkers Guild. It's an exclusive space for fantasy writers with unique resources, personalized feedback, and a supportive community to help you take your craft to the next level. Check out the link in the description for more information. Moving on, even with 4 steps covered though, stopping here would still risk losing readers because a crucial element is missing. Look at any memorable scene in fantasy literature. What sticks with you is often not the clever magic system or the intricate politics. It's the raw human emotion. The betrayal, the love, the fear, or the triumph. These universal feelings are what makes fantasy resonate despite its supernatural elements. Let's return to Mira for a moment as she recognizes an heirloom stolen from her family years ago. Here's a weak way to write that scene. That belongs to my family. Return it at once. Now watch how emotional truth transforms this scene. Funny thing about old objects. They remember who they belong to. And that one? It remembers my grandmother's hands. Remembers her polishing it every evening while telling me stories about our family's legacy. Stories about honor and trust, and what happens to those who break either. The second version works because it grounds the magical ability in personal memory and emotional truth. It's not just about ownership, it's about family laws and justice. Her magic of being able to see the history of any object she touches serves the emotion rather than replacing it. This is why characters shouldn't just express emotions, in my opinion. They should reveal them through the lens of who they are and the world they inhabit. Let me show you what I mean with 3 characters processing grief. First, imagine a battle-hardened general finding her father's old sword. The balance is different than I remembered. She tests the edge with her thumb. Father always said a dull blade kills more soldiers than a sharp one. Spent hours teaching me proper maintenance. He begins to methodically clean the weapon, each movement precise. Funny, all those lessons about swords, but he never taught me how to lose him. The second example is a young mage standing in front of a failed protection spell. Just like he warned me, he presses his hand against the shimmering barrier, watching it ripple and crack. Master Vale always said rushing the third incantation would destabilize the whole matrix. His fingers traced the failing runes. Spent a year correcting my pronunciation. Said it would save my life someday. He was right about that too. Just wasn't enough to save his. And lastly, we have a court scribe discovering her mother's journals. Look at these corrections. Every single document. She knew. She knew about the corruption and she runs her fingers over the careful annotations. She was building a case. A bitter laugh escapes her as she turns the page. All those nights I begged her to stop working, to come home early just once. And here's why she couldn't. Here's what she was trying to prevent. She closes the journal softly. How do you apologize to someone who can't hear you anymore? Each scene reveals grief through the character's specific lens. Military discipline, magical study, scholarly detail. The emotion emerges through their actions and observations, rather than direct statements about feeling sad or lost. Now, the previous techniques all serve to build credibility and investment in your world and characters. But there's one final challenge every fantasy writer faces. Those crucial scenes where everything changes. The confrontations, revelations, and decisions that transform both characters and story. This is where so many writers stumble. They abandon everything that made their dialogue work just when they need it most. In their rush to create epic moments, characters suddenly start speechifying, stating themes directly, or falling into melodrama. Let me show you how I approach this. Remember Mira? Here's her defining moment when she must choose between revealing a dangerous truth or protecting her livelihood. A bad version could sound like this. Your artifacts are forgeries. You dare deceive honest merchants and citizens alike with your false histories? You have no proof of such outrageous claims. I am a respected merchant of this city. How dare you threaten my reputation with baseless accusations? I shall expose your lies to all. My duty as an imperial inspector demands nothing less. The truth must prevail, no matter the cost. Then do what you must, but know that you shall face the consequences of slandering an innocent merchant. Now, the better version could be something like this. Mira traces her fingers along the forged artifact's surface, her usual sales patter dying in her throat. For years, she's been selling items with false histories, carefully crafted stories that matched what buyers wanted to hear. But now, facing the Imperial Inspector's knowing smile, that careful facade crumbles. You want to know something interesting about lies? Her voice stays steady even as her hands shake slightly. They leave marks, like scars, on objects, on people, on entire cities sometimes. She meets the inspector's eyes. I can show you if you're ready to see them. All of them. Including the ones in that ledger you're carrying. The one with the Chancellor's seal. Because objects remember who's touched them, Inspector. And who's been paying them to look the other way. The second version is much better because it maintains her established voice while raising the stakes. It shows the weight of the moment through specific details like shaking hands and the sealed ledger. It uses her power of seeing objects' histories in a way that flows naturally from the confrontation. It also turns a moment of vulnerability into one of strength without breaking character. And it lets the larger corruption story emerge through focused details rather than exposition. This is how climactic dialogue should work if you ask me, by bringing together every technique we've discussed in service of moments that matter. The key is remembering that even in life or death moments, people are still people. They don't suddenly become different characters just because the stakes are high. Instead, pressure reveals their true selves. The voice you've carefully crafted, the world you've built, the emotions you've layered in. And for that kind of emotional layering, mastering subtext is a crucial skill to have as a fantasy writer. So check out this video here next, where I show you not only how subtext can enrich your dialogue, but also character actions and even the settings of your story.